These talks are brought to you by Claritax Books and are proudly sponsored by Six Forward Capital Allowances.
Welcome back to our series of talks on capital allowances. This week's video is a one-off look at the treatment of overhead and preliminary costs and of professional fees. Such costs are a feature of any sizable construction project, and the sums involved can be substantial. Now, the meaning of professional costs is pretty clear, but the concepts of overheads and of preliminary expenses are not so straightforward. According to HMRC, preliminaries are indirect costs incurred over the duration of a project on items such as site management, insurance, general purpose labour, temporary accommodation, and security. But we do not need to get too hung up about the definition. As was acknowledged in the Wetherspoon case, the expression preliminaries is not a precise expression. Items which might be treated as preliminaries in one contract or tender might not be so treated in another. We can also note that overhead costs are sometimes distinguished from preliminary costs, but not always. In Wetherspoon again, the term overheads expenditure was used to cover both preliminary costs and professional fees. Allowances will be due for a proportion of these costs, but the question arises of how that proportion should be calculated. This was considered at all three hearings of the Wetherspoon case: Special Commissioners, First Tier Tribunal, and Upper Tribunal, where HMRC took a hard line. According to the case report at paragraph 94, HMRC maintained that a trader seeking capital allowances must specifically attribute all expenditure which is capable of attribution, however time-consuming or uneconomic that process may be. The tribunals would have none of it, though. The Upper Tribunal noted that it cannot have been the intention of the legislature that a trader should have to spend more on the minute attribution of preliminaries to underlying items of work than either their cost or the value of the capital allowance thereby to be obtained. As the tribunal ruled, HMRC's cross-appeal on this point entirely fails. The result of the tribunal ruling is that a common-sense approach is permitted, and this principle applies to professional costs as well as to overheads and other preliminary expenditure. The general approach will be to apportion such costs across the various categories of expenditure, perhaps as the bottom line in a spreadsheet analysis. So some costs will be allocated to the main pool, some to the special rate pool, some to non-qualifying expenditure, and so on. In making that allocation, certain rules are to be applied. First, if a cost is properly attributable only to one category of expenditure, it cannot be apportioned among the whole. So if there are legal fees on the acquisition of land, those fees are not allowable at all and must be treated as such. By contrast, the professional costs of an electrical engineer may, on the facts, be wholly allowable, though it may still need to be apportioned between special rate and standard rate expenditure. Other expenses, such as portable toilets used by site workers or insurance costs, cannot be attributed to any specific categories of work and should therefore be apportioned across all categories. A third category may cover such costs as scaffolding, where an accurate apportionment might be theoretically possible but very time-consuming. Wetherspoon therefore sought to apportion such costs on a pro rata basis. The tribunal unhesitatingly accepted that a pro rata apportionment of these items, and of any preliminaries where a detailed item-by-item attribution would be disproportionately time-consuming or expensive, was a legitimate approach. The HMRC guidance at CA 20070 has been updated to reflect these principles, though it arguably still errs in HMRC's favour. From next week, we'll have a change of perspective as we start to look at the different plant and machinery pools and at writing down allowances and annual investment allowances. Thank you for watching. I'm Ray Chidell, author of Capital Allowances and of the A to Z of Plant and Machinery from Claritax Books. This talk was sponsored by 6Forward, an independent property tax consultancy working with accountants to enhance capital allowances for their clients.